Name is Stephanie Wolf, and I am the Membership Relations Coordinator here at Population Connection. Thank you all for joining us to mark this year's World Population Day, which falls annually on July 11th. So we are gathered a little bit early to commemorate the day. It's a delight to be in the company of passionate individuals interested in learning more about our latest survey results. And the results will uncover how alarmist headlines about declining birth rates is shaping public perception. On today's call, I am happy to introduce part of our communications team who oversaw the survey process. We are led by Marian Starkey, our Vice President for Communications and editor of our quarterly magazine. She has a master's in population and development from the London School of Economics and Political Science. We are also here with Olivia Nader, our communications manager. Olivia holds a master's and a bachelor's degree in zoology. She joined the Pop Connect team in 2022, and she responds to population-related news articles and has built an impressive collection of blog posts for our website. If you have any questions for either of our speakers, please drop them in the Q&A box that is found at the bottom of your screen. We will do our very best to get those answered during the Q&A portion. And for any questions we don't have time to answer live, we will provide written responses along with a recording of this presentation, the presentation slides, and access to the chat box discussion. Now, those are all the housekeeping items from me at this time. So let's go ahead and jump in. I will go ahead and send it over to Marian to get us started.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us today. Let me just see if I can get my slides shared. Okay, so thank you for joining us today. We're really pleased to be presenting the results of two surveys. We're going to spend more time talking about our more recent one, but we do have a survey that we conducted last October that we haven't presented yet. So I'm just going to run through that quickly at the beginning. We've conducted these two surveys because we're really frustrated by the incessant news stories about a birth dearth, the baby bust, fertility decline, crisis, population collapse. You've seen all the headlines, I know, because I hear from you all the time. I get a lot of emails and phone calls from our members who are just as frustrated as we are. Just yesterday, I got 2 phone calls and 2 emails about the same NPR segment. So I know that this is irking you all as much as it is us. We can barely keep up. I mean, these stories are coming out so frequently, it really is hard to get in touch with everybody who is writing them and all of the editors that are publishing them. Olivia tries. She's the burden is mostly on her. She's the person on our staff who contacts journalists, and she has been sharing these survey results with them and asking them to cover the issue more comprehensively, but also writing letters to the editor all the time, sometimes several per week. So we're trying. Some of them get published. They don't all get published, but these journalists and editors are hearing from us. So it was her idea to do these 2 surveys. So this is the one that we did last October. We commissioned Lake Research Partners, which is a really well-respected polling firm, to do a survey for us about people's fertility desires, intentions, and outcomes. And the reason we were interested in doing this is because there's this common narrative that I'm sure you've seen that women are having fewer children than they actually want, and that's what is fueling this, baby bust crisis. And we wanted to find out whether that's true, because from our perspective, it seems like most of these articles are drawing on survey results from a Gallup survey that's done every few years. The question, though, that the Gallup survey asks is, what do you think is the ideal number of children for a family to have? It's not how many children do you want over the course of your lifetime. It's like, what's the ideal number of children for just any old random family to have? And the average answer that comes out of that survey is 2.7 children. And so people look at that and they say, oh, well, Americans are only having 1.6 children each. So, there's this gap of an entire child that people want to be having and aren't able to have. And so we wanted to find out whether that was true, and if so, to what extent, and also what might be preventing people from having the number of children that they would like to have. So we asked them the question, if you could choose exactly the number of children to have in your whole life, how many would that be? And then for people who already have kids, we said, if you could go back to a time in your life when you didn't have any children, and then the same question. And this is the results. So the blue bars are the actual number of children that people have, and the green bars are the desired number of children. You can clearly see here that the most popular desired family size is 2 children. It's at 34%. This very tall bar on the left, the 49% blue bar, that's for 0 children. That's people who have 0 children. And of course, this survey interviewed or surveyed people that were as young as 18. So a lot of them just haven't started their childbearing, and the people that are in their younger years, even if they've started, probably haven't finished. So that obviously kind of skews the results there. But yeah, you can see that the majority of adults, 55% of adults, want to have a small family of 2 or fewer children, with the most popular number being 2. And so then we gave people a list of 16 different factors that we've commonly heard can be barriers to people having the number of kids they want. And we asked people how much of an impact each one of these factors had on their desire or ability to have children or to have another child. And when we asked that question, there was an overwhelming response for the concern over the state of the world. So 35% of people said that their concern over the state of the world had a strong impact on their ability or desire to have children or another child. And then affordability coming in right behind that. And then for women under 50 and for Gen Z men and women, you can see a lot of factors came in kind of like the mid 20%. Mental health, being worried about how laws that restrict abortion and reproductive health care can affect them and their partner during pregnancy. Age, there not being enough support for parents, work demands, schedule. So a lot of different things that are keeping people from having the kids they want, or at least having them in the timeline that they want. And then we told our survey participants what the current and projected national and global populations are and asked how concerned they were about each one. More people are concerned about global population growth than they are about national population growth. And conversely, more people are not concerned at all about national population growth versus being concerned about global population growth. So that just shows, that we're hearing a lot about low birth rates and low fertility, but it's not something that's really upsetting or concerning the American populace. And then for people who did say that they were somewhat or very concerned, across the subgroups, the thing that made them the most concerned about global population growth is more children living in poverty and the depletion of natural resources. And then the final thing that I'll say about the survey that we did last year is that we did a split test with 2 similar statements and asked for people's level of agreement with each of these statements. So the first one, overpopulation and climate change make us uneasy about raising children on a planet that is already in trouble. And that's versus the next question, which is overpopulation and climate change make us uneasy about creating another human who will contribute to the destruction of the planet. And again, half the people got the first question, half the people got the second question. And you can see that for the people who are uneasy about raising children on a planet in trouble, sorry, there's a very loud airplane going over my house right now, that 55% of people either strongly or somewhat agree with that statement. And that percentage goes down to 42% for people being concerned about their own children potentially having an impact on planetary destruction. And I don't know, I think that's an interesting thing to call out because it might give us a little bit of insight into why it is so difficult to get people to change their individual behaviors, but also why it's difficult to get people to support policies that would make a big collective difference in terms of our consumption and the harm that we're doing to the planet. Okay, so moving, and you can read all about that survey. It was, I think I mentioned already that it was a feature article in the June issue of our quarterly magazine. There's also a blog post that Olivia wrote on our website, along with all of the raw data and everything, so people can look through that to their heart's content. So then, kind of based off of that original survey, we decided to do another one last month in June, and we commissioned YouGov to do this one. And this one was much simpler. It was a 10-question online poll, basically. And we wanted to find out whether all of these headlines that people are, or I don't know if not necessarily that people are seeing, these headlines that are out there, whether people are seeing them, and if so, whether it's influencing their knowledge or perceptions about birth rates and population growth and things. So This was a representative sample of 2,000 US adults. I should have mentioned the previous survey was a representative sample of 1,418 adults. So we asked people, what do you think is the current national population? And before asking this question, we said, it's really important to us that you answer honestly, don't cheat, don't look up the answer. And we actually even timed it. And so it would time out if people didn't answer quickly enough, because we thought that might indicate that they were looking it up. And the variety of answers that we got to this and the next question were not entirely surprising, but confirmed what we thought we already knew, which is that people just have no clue what the population is nationally or globally. Olivia created this categorization herself. This is not something that YouGov did for us, but we wanted to just kind of display how close or how far off people's guesses were. So people who guessed within 5% of the correct US population was only 16%. Only 16% of people within 5% knew what the US population was. And the wedges go clockwise. So the green one is people who were close, which was within 10%. The navy one is a reasonable guess, and that was within 20%. The forest green one is somewhat far off, which is within 50%. And then the yellow wedge, which is by far the largest, is people who are very far off. So people who were off by more than 50%. And just to kind of like give you an idea of what those answers actually looked like, and for anybody who doesn't know, the current US population is about 342 million. So we had over 340 people say that the US population is in the thousands or lower. We had over 600 say that it's in the billions. And we had 27 people who said that the US population was over 1 trillion people. And then same question, but for global, asking people what the global population was. And you can see that people did better with this one. The current global population is estimated to be at about 8.2 billion. And just over half were very far off, but that means that nearly half wasn't so far off. So again, just comparing the previous chart to this one, you can see, that people did slightly better, but still over 450 people said that there were fewer than 1 billion people on Earth. 228 people said there were tens of billions. 120 said that there are hundreds of billions, and 148 people said that there were trillions, or they even put in numbers that don't exist, like zillions and gazillions and gazillions. And I don't know, we have no idea, of course, how serious people's answers were, but we like to think that they were giving it their best guess. And this just really, to us anyway, demonstrates how low people's awareness is of demographic trends and indicators and data, and how little they're exposed to this information. And that's one of the things that our population education program tries to address. It's an important program for a lot of reasons, but one of them is it's really the only program in the United States that's trying to make students more population literate, just trying to make sure that they're exposed to these themes and understand, demographic realities, so that they don't succumb to believing the misinformation that we're about to talk about. So we then asked people whether they had seen any headlines about declining birth rates in the past month, and you can see that 31% of people said that they had, so most people hadn't. And then we asked whether people had seen headlines about global population growth in the past month, and hardly anybody said yes. 1 in 10, 11% of people said that they had. One thing, and this probably isn't so surprising, I guess, that the reported exposure to headlines increased dramatically with education level and income. The age group that's 65 and over had the highest proportion of respondents who reported seeing headlines about declining birth rates. Just again, to kind of reiterate that education component, for global population growth, 8% of respondents with a high school education or less reported seeing related headlines versus 16% of respondents with a postgraduate degree. And then for declining birth rates, 20% of respondents with a high school education or less reported seeing headlines versus 49% of respondents with a postgraduate degree. And interestingly, no group that we surveyed had more than 16%, of respondents saying that they had seen headlines about global population growth in the past month. And it's This is a media failure. It's a very real issue. The global population is growing by about 70 million people a year. It's frustrating because all of these articles about low birth rates and a baby bust are kind of taking us away from the work that we really want to be doing, which is talking about global population growth and the challenges that it presents to health and development and the environment. But instead, we find ourselves working on this because this is what people want to talk about right now. And that's largely due to how the media has chosen to report on demographic issues in recent years. So then we followed the question about what the size of the national and world populations are by asking them whether it's growing, shrinking, or staying the same. And you can see that nearly 40% of Americans don't know that the national population is growing, which, 61% of people do or guessed that it is growing. But still, 21% of people think it's actually shrinking, and 18% of people think that it's staying the same. And just to kind of drill down into that a little bit more, across age groups, people who were 65 and older had the poorest understanding of the national population trend, with only 55% of them believing that the US population is growing. This is also the same group that is most likely to have seen the headlines about low birth rates. And we can't think that that is a coincidence. There has to be a correlation there. And then also related to that, the knowledge of the correct answer declined with education, contrary to what you would imagine, and for Democrats and liberals and for women. And, educated people are the ones who are the most likely to be exposed to these misleading headlines about low birth rates. So it's no wonder that they're less likely to get this answer correct. And then this is just us kind of taking guesses, but women do tend to be enrolled in college and university at higher rates and have higher educational attainment than men. So that could be that correlation there. And same for Democrats have higher educational attainment on average than Republicans do. So we just assume that it's again, just kind of an educational correlation. And then we ask the same question of people, is our global population growing, shrinking, or staying the same? And again, kind of with the previous pie charts that I showed, people did a slightly better job with the global population question. 72% correctly answered that it is growing. But nearly 30% of people thought that it was either shrinking or staying the same. So that's I think that I'm gonna stop there and turn it over to Olivia, who's gonna run through the rest of the results, and then of course we'll take questions once she's done. So thank you for listening. Let me see if I can stop my screen share. Yeah, okay, thanks.
Hey everyone. Okay, I'm gonna try sharing my screen. Let's see if it works. Okay, can you see it?
Looks good.
Good. Okay, so we then asked people how concerned they are about either global population growth or declining birth rates. So this pie chart shows the concern for global population growth, and only roughly a third are either very to somewhat concerned about global population growth. So very concerned is the light blue here, somewhat concerned is the light green. So you can see it's only a third. And then the biggest proportion by far said that they were not at all concerned. So 42% of people said they were not at all concerned about global population growth, which as a population organization is of course not something you want to hear. However, we then asked the same question about declining birth rates. And concern for declining birth rates, luckily, is even lower. So just a quarter, roughly, of respondents said that they were either very or somewhat concerned about declining birth rates, which is somewhat comforting. And again, the majority said that so 53% here said that they are not at all concerned, so much higher than for global population growth. So this is encouraging because even though they are seeing all these headlines, they're just not that concerned about it. We also found that conservatives, so people who identify as conservative politically, they were more likely to report higher concern about declining birth rates than liberals. So around a third of conservatives said that they were very to somewhat concerned about declining birth rates versus just 17% of liberals. So definitely a political divide there. And we found something similar for global population growth, where it was inversed essentially. So liberals reported higher concern about global population growth. Around 38%, as many as 38% of liberals said they were either very or somewhat concerned about global population growth versus just 28% of conservatives. So it's interesting, and probably also related to the fact that the most alarmist baby bust articles tend to be in the more right-leaning media outlets, and so conservatives are more exposed to those kind of stories, and also, of course, from their political representatives, conservative politicians tend to talk more about declining birth rates and are more concerned about those. So that explains some of that difference. Then we asked people what their concerns are regarding either declining birth rates or global population growth. So people who said that they were not concerned about declining birth rates were not shown this question. This question was only shown to people who said they were either very, somewhat, or a little concerned. And for declining birth rates, the erosion of traditional family values / fewer people getting married and having children was by far the #1 concern, which was really surprising to us because we kind of threw that in there after we had come up with all the other kind of more common arguments about why declining birth rates are bad. Those are mostly like the socioeconomic arguments about slower economic growth, fewer workers, fewer young people to take care of elderly people, Social Security and Medicare insolvency. Those are kind of the things that you come across in these media articles more. So we were expecting those to be on top. So it was really interesting that as many as 29% of people said that the erosion of traditional family values was their #1 concern regarding declining birth rates. And yeah, this was also the #1 concern in every age group, even among young people, which was also surprising. And especially among those aged 65 and older. So among those 65 and older, 35% of them ranked it as their top concern. Again, there was a big political gap for the family values reason, as you might expect. 45% of conservatives selected this as their top concern versus just 10% of liberals. And as I mentioned before, this is not that surprising considering that many conservative pronatalists, including those in the Trump administration, often blame non-traditional families and feminism for a supposed baby shortage. So that's kind of the rhetoric that they're exposed to. Yeah, so then the socioeconomic concerns didn't rank as highly. Social Security and Medicare insolvency received the second highest proportion of votes for rank 1 overall. But yeah, much lower than that for eroding family values. And then in third place, we have a population collapse that threatens civilization. Again, sorry about that. Again, we didn't think that that would be very popular because it's kind of a crazy reason. If you know about what's actually happening with the population. But people like Elon Musk, probably the most notorious baby bust alarmist, talk about this all the time. So he's always on his Twitter, now renamed X platform, sending out posts about how the population is going to collapse because people are having smaller families. And this guy's got millions of followers. People take him seriously. A lot of people, unfortunately, still believe that he's a genius, even though he's proven that wrong many times, I would argue. But yeah, that's how it is. People, some people believe that. So 14% of people said that population collapse that threatens civilization was their #1 concern regarding declining birth rates. So then we asked the same question about global population growth. And for this question, the top 2 concerns were more people living in poverty, with around a quarter of respondents selecting this as their top concern, followed closely by depletion of natural resources at 22%. So this is very similar to what we found in our lake survey. So the survey that Marian talked about at the beginning of this presentation. These 2 reasons were actually also the top concerns that came out in the lake survey. More people living in poverty, depletion of natural resources, those are kind of the top 2 ones. And then interestingly, things like climate change / increasing greenhouse gas emissions and loss of nature, ecosystems, and extinction of species, not quite as worrisome for people. So 13% and 12% of respondents selected this as their top concern. And again, there was a political divide for this question. So the top concern for conservatives who are concerned about global population growth was more people in poverty. So 27% of conservatives chose this as their #1 concern, while for liberals, it was increasing greenhouse gas emissions and worsening climate change, with 24% choosing this as their #1 concern. Yeah, again, you have this political divide, which is quite interesting. The ones that didn't receive many votes were more people exposed to natural disasters, a little bit more abstract, I guess, and higher youth unemployment. Those are more abstract associations that are maybe not that obviously related to global population growth. So then, in conclusion, what can we learn from this? So the #1 takeaway is, as Marian already talked about, is that the general public is generally really ill-informed about population sizes and trends. And this is likely being exacerbated by the barrage of media stories about declining birth rates. Secondly, we found out that not many are concerned about either declining birth rates or global population growth. However, concern about global population growth is still slightly higher than concern over declining birth rates, which is encouraging. We also found that conservatives are generally more concerned about declining birth rates and changing family norms, whereas liberals are generally more concerned about global population growth and its environmental impacts. And yeah, lastly, there's clearly a need for organizations like ours to keep pushing back against all this baby bust misinformation and to keep raising awareness of population trends and impacts. We also think that the fact that fewer people are concerned about declining birth rates could be that those are still largely predicted downsides rather than actual tangible impacts. So things like worker shortages, Medicare insolvency, slower economic growth, those are all things that are kind of talked about as things that could happen if birth rates keep declining, as opposed to things that are actually negatively impacting people today. Whereas for global population growth, anyone who's been around for more than a few decades has witnessed the negative impacts of population growth around them, unless they live somewhere where the population is declining. So those are kind of hard to overlook, those reasons. So that's probably why concern over population growth is still a little bit higher. Yeah, and I think that kind of wraps up our main findings. We can probably move on to questions, and also you're welcome to email us about any questions you might have or any comments related to this work.
Yeah, so we're gonna run our own Q&A session here. We had a lot of pre-submitted questions, so we'll go through those first. Maybe starting with the more like straightforward ones. We had a question asking, across age groups, people aged 65 and older had the poorest understanding of the national population trend. Which age group had the best understanding? And that age group was the 45 to 64-year-olds. They had the highest awareness at 64%, and that is the same group that had the lowest exposure to low birth rate headlines. So again, there seems to be a pretty direct correlation here between people seeing these misleading headlines and not really having the right answers about population trends. So I don't know. I don't know how you want to do this, Olivia. Just kind of go back and forth. I mean, somebody asked which data did you find the most surprising or interesting and why? Answer that.
Yeah, there was one finding that we didn't talk about that kind of surprised me. It was that men are a lot more exposed to headlines about declining birth rates than women are. For some reason, there was like a big difference. And we were trying to like figure out why that could be. But yeah, it's not something that I can easily explain. I read a Pew Research report that showed that men are generally more interested in media stories or headlines about political and economic issues, whereas women are more interested in headlines about like health and social issues and that kind of thing. So that could be part of the reason that women are just not clicking on these headlines as much. But yeah, that was kind of the most interesting thing for me.
Yeah, probably me too. I'm just, again, not being able to really explain it with any sort of conviction, you know. And I do think, I know we've talked about this a lot already, but just the fact that the more education people have, the less educated they are about these population trends, I think is just really interesting and telling and not what I expected necessarily. And maybe if I had thought through it a little bit more, I would have expected it. But I just remember seeing the results for the first time and being like, wait, am I reading this wrong? Like what is happening here? People who, are trying to be more informed about the world around them are becoming less informed because of these articles that they're reading. And it's, a big disservice that they are doing to people. So, okay, the next question that was pre-submitted is the most reported reason for those concerned about low birth rates was erosion of traditional family values and fewer people getting married and having children. Can you touch on the tension between traditional values and environmental concern? Go first. I mean, we know from these survey results that Republicans are more concerned about low birth rates than people who belong to other political parties. We also know that conservatives tend to be the group, the people that are pushing these pronatalist initiatives. So I know Stephanie put a link in the chat to a page that Olivia curated on our website of different pronatalist measures that this administration has taken, or not necessarily measures, some of them are, but also just quotes, kind of crazy quotes, and ideas that they've floated. And conservatives also tend to be less supportive of legislation to protect the environment and funding to protect the environment. So to me, that makes perfect sense to me. But I don't know, Olivia, do you want to say anything else about that?
No, I mean that's pretty much it. Yeah, I mean that's just what they're exposed to more than more left-leaning people. There's also, yeah, like I said before, there's a big divide between like left-leaning media and right-leaning media, although everyone kind of talks about declining fertility rates in a negative light generally, unfortunately. The conservative outlets are more alarmist about it. They'll talk about it as like a real crisis, like a huge issue, and so yeah, that explains some of that divide.
Yeah. And then somebody asked, are conservatives using the view that birth rates are declining as another lame excuse to fail to support family planning? And I know that we dug up a few examples of the answer being yes. I don't know. Do you want to run through those since they're things that you collected for that
Sure.
pronatalism page?
Yeah, so there are a few instances where conservative politicians talked about how um, either birth control or abortion is bad because it decreases birth rates. So in his first speech as vice president, J.D. Vance attended the March for Life, which is a anti-abortion march in DC, and he said that he opposes abortion because he wants more babies in the United States of America. He literally said that. So then, of course, there's Elon Musk, talks about this all the time. He uses his platform a lot to sow misinformation about birth control, about contraception. He tweeted, for example, in February 2024, this is a direct quote, hormonal birth control makes you fat, doubles risk of depression, and triples risk of suicide. This is the clear scientific consensus, but very few people seem to know it. So obviously trying to scare women off of using contraception. Then at the Young Women's Leadership Summit, which was, actually, I don't know much about this. Do you want to talk about this, Marion?
Yeah, this was an article I think that came out a week or two ago that I was interested in. So there was a Young Women's Leadership Summit is what it was called, and I can't actually even remember where it took place, but there were about 3,000 attendees. It was hosted by an organization called Turning Point USA, which claims to have played a critical role in turning out young voters for President Trump to elect him. And they, it was this conference for young women who are kind of reaching that stage of their lives where they're either going to go to college or they're going to maybe settle down and start a family or get married. And the heavy messaging was on, well, I'll just say a couple of the mottos of the conference: less burnout, more babies. So urging women to not try to bother with a career because it's just too much. You can't handle a career and children, and so therefore you should give up the career and just focus on the husband and children. And another one of the oft repeated slogans from that conference was less feminism, more femininity. And I'll try to dig up the article that I was reading. I think it might have been in the Washington Post, but I can't remember for sure. But it just, the thing that bothered me the most maybe about what I read is that it was women. I mean, it was women giving these speeches for the most part, and women attending the conference because that was the intended audience. But the article did even point out that there were some young women, teenage girls in the audience who were confused because here are these professional, successful women, most of whom had children, maybe all of them did, telling people that you can't have it all, you can't have a career and family, but they have it. So why can't I? And there was no answer provided to that question, that rhetorical question, but it's an interesting thing to read about and an upsetting thing to know is happening. Not surprising, I guess, but.
There was also a recent lawsuit in Texas to ban medication abortion, which said that the decrease in births due to abortion is a sovereign injury to the state in itself. So they're saying abortion is terrible because it injures the state by decreasing birth rates, which is crazy. And it warns that medication abortion is depressing expected birth rates for teenage mothers, as if births to teenage mothers was a good thing that, we should aim for. And a loss of potential population will result in diminishment of political representation and loss of federal funds. So it's clearly spelled out, clearly written out that they want to ban abortion because they think it decreases birth rates, which is just crazy. But yeah. Anyway, erosion of traditional family values. Has the construction of pro-family planning message, which promotes traditional family values, been considered? I'm assuming this means, is it because people are putting out a kind of traditional pro-family messaging? I would say the answer is yes. Like that's kind of what's driving this fear of erosion of traditional values, is because a lot of conservatives are pushing this this messaging that the only right family is a traditional family. Ideally, women should stay at home and have many children, that kind of thing. Yeah, that answered the question. What else is there? Somebody asks, may this be due to the fact that many people have little grasp of what abstract numbers mean in reality, perhaps putting it into context, like how many people can be fitted into a baseball field would make it more real and easier to understand. Yes, we think that people definitely have a hard time conceptualizing very large numbers. It's really hard to kind of picture 1 billion people or 8 billion people, or how is 8 billion different from 8 trillion? Like, people seem to think they're kind of close. Um, yes, I think visualizations definitely help. And I think that's probably something I know that that is something that our pop ed program does in a very interactive way. They show, they teach kids about exponential growth and what that actually means, and the actual size of the human population. Like, what does that mean? What does 8 billion mean? Like, how many people can be fitted into a baseball field? That kind of analogy, definitely helpful.
Yeah, I mean, there's that old, I don't know what you'd call it, like a belief, I guess, I don't know, that you could put the entire population of the world inside Texas. And I don't know if that's helpful or not, because everybody's just standing there shoulder to shoulder in Texas. Like, what's the point of knowing that, I guess? But yeah, that's kind of, I think that's like one way that people think that they are visualizing the numbers to be smaller than they actually are, like they're kind of like, oh, 8 billion isn't that many. They could all fit in Texas. So yeah, it's a difficult thing to try to visualize. And I think just since we're already on population education, we did have a pre-submitted question saying, has Population Connection measured the effectiveness of pop ed? If it has, and it is in fact effective at raising awareness, how can we most rapidly amplify that work? There's such a terrible lack of imagination and reflection in American culture today. One of the challenges with our entire organization's work is being able to measure effectiveness. I mean, we can't know whether people 10 years from now are going to have a smaller family than they otherwise would have because they were exposed to our magazine or to our pop ed lesson plans. But what we can do is measure how many people are using those lesson plans in their classrooms and how many students are exposed to them when they wouldn't otherwise be learning about these topics at all. And so I wanted to just share, pop ed does a biennial, every 2 years, does this survey of all of the educators that use their materials. And the output is long. So if you really want to dig into some pop ed data, you click on the link that I just put in the chat. They ask people, educators, questions about, like, how often do you use our lesson plans? Do your students seem to find them helpful? Does it seem to change their perspective, and et cetera. So we can measure that, and we do very meticulously every 2 years. But the other stuff, yeah, we've never found a way to be able to measure people's later behaviors based on our work today. I mean, we like to think that we're part of the reason why the US fertility rate declined as much as it did since the time that this organization was founded. We were the voice of the population movement. And so we like to take some credit there, but we can't know how much credit to take. So.
So there were a couple of questions about achieving a more sustainable global population size. So one pre-submitted question asked, so from Allison, she asked, is it really possible for us to degrowth our world back down to 2 billion people and abandon growth economics in favor of sustainable living? And then a related question from Jeremy asks, it seems to me that a good starting point for countering the alarmism headlines is to point out what a sustainable global population is. Has any recent work been done on this? It seems that estimates in the past were 1 to 3 billion. Yeah, so the work that's been done is few years old. I'm not aware of anything that's happened like in the past 5 years or so. And past estimates have tended to be around 1 to 3 billion. That assumes, I think, that everyone has like a comfortable quality of life. Obviously, the size at which our global population is sustainable depends on how much each of us consumes. So if everyone consumes very little, then a much bigger population, well, not much bigger than now, but a big population is sustainable. Whereas if everyone consumes a huge amount, then we need a much smaller population to live within our planet's carrying capacity. But yes, estimates tend to be between 1 to 3 billion, which is probably why Allison talked about 2 billion. Yeah, we do point that out. Actually, when we counter all these alarmist headlines, we talk about the fact that at our current population size, we've already breached 6 out of 9 critical planetary boundaries. So this is the planetary boundary framework that's developed by the Stockholm Institute. They measure the human footprint in a bunch of different areas, including climate, ocean acidification, pollution, biodiversity loss, those kind of things. And then they assess to what degree we've already breached kind of like a critical catastrophic threshold or not. And we've already breached 6 out of 9, which is, I mean, how much clearer proof can you get that our current population size at current consumption rates is unsustainable? And the problem is that consumption is expected to keep increasing because there are so many people still living in poverty who obviously have a right to consume more, and we want those people to not be poor anymore. So sure, we need to cut back on overconsumption in countries like the United States, but in order to facilitate that consumption increase in the developing world, we also need to stabilize our population at a more sustainable level. And regarding getting back down to somewhere like 2 billion, that's going to take a long time. So there were some calculations done that showed that if we continue on the current trend, so the trend that the UN projects in its median trajectory, then it'll take about another 300 years to get down to 2 billion people. So that's barring any major disasters, obviously. That's just through fertility decline. If we continue the way we're going now, we'll be at 2 billion in about 2350. So then when you see all these population collapse, fertility crisis headlines, that's just even more absurd because like you're talking about like, 300 years into the future. Why are you so worried about this now? This is not a problem now. We're still going up to 10 billion in the second half of the century. So it's all a bit frustrating.
Yeah. Yeah, and on that point, Ron wrote a question in the Q&A box. Is the demographic prediction that world population will top out at about 10.3 billion, then slowly decline, influencing people's lack of concern about the population bomb? And I would say absolutely. I mean, people are taking it as a foregone conclusion that the population is going to peak in a couple of decades and then start shrinking after that. And while that is what the UN's median projection shows, that will be the peak in 2084, I think, and that it'll start gradually declining after that. That median projection is oftentimes considered very optimistic because the assumption made in that projection is that fertility rates are going to decline pretty rapidly in the countries that presently have very high fertility rates. And certainly cutting off all of our family planning aid isn't going to help with that. I mean, they're just, and before that even, there has not been enough investment in international family planning to make that a reality. And if anything, it seems like we're moving in the wrong direction. Not just the United States, but several European countries have also recently cut back their foreign aid budgets. So the ideal is for countries, I guess, to be able to afford their own family planning programming. And of course, they do contribute. They pay part of the programming, but they are not wealthy countries and can't afford to put forward as much money as is needed. So all to say we don't really know. I mean, the range of estimates or the range of projections for the end of this century go from what is it? I don't know, like 7 billion to 11 billion people or something like that, and still growing. So there's a huge range, and it all completely depends on people's fertility patterns between now and then. And of course, you're talking about people whose like grandparents aren't even alive yet. So we don't know how their behavior will look, and we don't know what the environment will look like. We don't know how climate change will affect people's fertility. I mean, there are so many unknowns. We just can't know. But like Olivia said, I mean, we're talking about more than 300 years in the future. So I think, we can do our best now to try to make this a sustainable planet and a good place for future generations to live. But some of that is going to be their burden to bear once they get here. So.
William asks if there are legitimate concerns associated with declining birth rates, for example, regarding social security. Yes. Those are the economic concerns that we thought people would be more concerned about than erosion of family values. And those are the ones that are always, mentioned in these media stories. Social security insolvency is definitely a concern because Social Security, the way it was designed, is unfortunately a bit like a Ponzi scheme that requires ever more young people to provide funds for the retiring old people. So there needs to be some changes, and I'm not an economist, so I don't really know what the answer is, but our whole economic system is built on the notion of infinite growth, which is absurd when you think about it. It's not sustainable, and we need to rethink that. And there are small things that we can do now, easy things that would help with that. Some of those include, for example, raising the retirement age. Not very popular, but it can help. Another one is investing more in preventive healthcare so that older people stay healthy and are able to work for longer and are less dependent when they age. Another one is investing in education and child welfare so that in order to maximize the size of the workforce, in order to maximize productivity, you can make sure that every child is able to fulfill their potential and become active members of the workforce. Things like that. I don't know, Marianne, do you want to say any more about that? Because in fact, Marianne created a whole webpage about population and the economy and how there are available policy levers that we can implement now that would help with the effects of declining birth rates and population aging.
Yeah, the ones that Olivia mentioned, I'm just pulling up the page right now and putting it in the chat. Oh, looks like Stephanie beat me to it. Yeah, so I mean, one of the policy levers that we talk about quite a bit is doing away with the cap on Social Security income tax. So right now, people's income is only taxed up to, I believe it increases every single year, but I think this year it's like 176,100. That's the number that sticks in my head. So any income over that level is not taxed by Social Security, which of course means that people who have lower incomes are being taxed at a higher rate than people who have high incomes. It also only taxes wages. So people who are wealthy tend to rely more on non-wage income. So things like investments and dividends and stock options and stuff like that. And none of that is taxed by Social Security. So just fixing those couple of things would bring us pretty close to warding off insolvency, which I think is projected to happen in like 2032 or 2033 or something soon. But like Olivia said, there's no political will. It's people who are wealthy who tend to have the most sway on Capitol Hill, and they don't want to pay more taxes. And here we are. So not really sure what will end up happening with that, but hopefully something, because the solutions are right there in front of us, and it's just a matter of us taking them or following them. Yeah.
And of course, you always have to weigh these economic downsides against the devastating impacts of continued population growth. I mean, eventually, like our existence on this planet will be threatened by environmental breakdown. And that's, to me, that's a much bigger concern than you know, slower economic growth.
Mhm. Yeah, I'm seeing that we're having a lot of questions requesting links to articles. So we'll look through all of these unanswered questions after the fact, and we will provide answers in writing. And so we'll rack our brains and dig up some articles that that meet the requests that people are asking. But I think, yeah, we're probably at the end of our Q&A and should invite Stephanie to come back and wrap things up. Thank you for all of your questions. There are a lot. I know we didn't answer quite a few of them, but yeah, we will. Stephanie will follow up with all sorts of materials, including written answers from us.
Yes, so we are at the hour. A big thank you to Marian and Olivia for the incredible presentation today. I thought it was very interesting to dive deeper into this data. As Marian mentioned, we will follow up with plenty of links and resources. Anything that was shared in the chat, you will receive. So stay tuned for that wrap-up email. And thank you again to the attendees for joining us and gathering together to commemorate World Population Day, which again is this Friday. We will be in touch very soon. We appreciate your support and have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.